What I love about Lazaris. Now, I've been thinking about this in context of noticing one particular pattern, which is that because of the behavior of friends of Lazaris, number one, concept synergy, number two, and statements by Lazaris saying, that they're the highest resonance that ever will touch the planet, things like that. It has seemed kind of risky or kind of elevating in fear and anxiety to communicate criticism, dislike, confusion, doubt, any form of antipathy towards Lazaris or concept synergy, because Lazaris chose and chooses on a daily basis a monopoly relationship with them. And so, the stakes are high. I mean, concept synergy throws you out of the room or the forum, etc. If you criticized Lazaris. Lazaris doesn't say anything about this. So I think that one of the things that has occurred as questions, doubts, criticisms have mounted over decades, that without a clear outlet, because Lazaris for the most part doesn't dialogue, they monologue a lot of the time. So I think there was unsettling kind of layers of things building up, and then a resistance to just saying, this is nuts, so what's up with this, and what's up with that, and why are you doing that if this is this way? And just a sense that maybe that's negative ego. And so stuff has built up. And my experience is that by voicing all of these things, that layering kind of has somewhat dispelled. Like, I don't think there's anything that I'm critical about either concept synergy or Lazaris that I haven't voiced in a way that I understand, can empathize with, seems like a good and reasonable question or criticism from my perspective and life experience. And, it seems unlikely that concept synergy, Jach, or Lazaris will address any of those things directly, given their pattern. That's Lazaris's and concept synergy's pattern. But one of the things that I've noticed is that on the other side of voicing all of the things that bother me for one reason or another, that I end up feeling closer to Lazaris. And, I guess the pattern was too big to predict that, meaning I wasn't looking to feel closer. I was looking to break the stranglehold and fear-based silence. It did not seem healthy in any relationship to not be speaking out of fear. Now, it is also not healthy to frighten people from speaking, in the way that concept synergy does with their, abuse contract, that you have to agree to do these and not do these things, or they'll cut off your relationship with your friend. So that's not healthy either. It's not healthy to live in fear and in silence, and it's not healthy to intimidate people into silence, whether with non-disclosure agreements or any other, form of intimidation. So both of those are unhealthy aspects in the relationship. And kind of partly to break the pattern, partly to break the contract of shame and silence, I've put this channel and website and stuff together. And what I find on the other side of that is the disconnect and antipathy has been expressed. So what remains is the sympathy or the attraction, that was to some extent there in the first place. So another way of saying that is one part of me is drawn to Lazaris, and another part of me feels antipathy in my relationship with Lazaris, and that when the antipathy is and was repressed or pushed down in fear, induced by control tactics at concept synergy, and also induced just by my own of conflict avoidant nature and past trauma. Everyone in our culture understands that there are certain boundaries that are often invisible, and if you cross those lines and trigger people's reaction in certain areas, then you're cast out. They react and move into traumatic terrain and dissociate and put up boundaries rather than seek to understand and connect. And in a highly traumatized culture, one can pretty much guarantee with 95% accuracy that there are certain regions that while it might be appropriate or healthy to go into for the other person, that for the person, that we each have a region or an area where if someone crosses a certain line that we've defined to protect ourselves from reenacting a trauma, from remembering a trauma, from helplessness and fear, basically, that we will push the other person away to protect ourself, our ego, from going into traumatic terrain, to re-traumatizing. And that a lot of control is used to kind of make sure that we can relate and deal with our world, but not engage in the areas that trauma remains in a regressed state. When you're traumatized or re-traumatized, you go back emotionally to the age of the original event. And so suddenly you're looking at the event through the eyes of a 3-year-old. And to a 3-year-old, everything is very, very big. And so it's very, very scary, particularly if you've had a number of sociopathic experiences, a number of traumatic events, then it's big and frightening. And then, that regressed, traumatized 3-year-old tries to do everything it can, to control the situation. So we all have those arenas, and I'm relatively used to being cast out for touching in that terrain. I mean, it's the reason that my parents abused myself and my siblings but just by the openness and innocence of a child wanting to connect deeply with a parent. The parent is going to be exposed through mirror neurons to large portions of their own psyche through empathy for the child. And that's often going to take the parent into unprocessed trauma. And, in the case of my parents, PTSD, complex PTSD, fear, paranoia, etc. And then all of the fear of those states that are not resolved in an emotionally illiterate culture are then projected onto the child. So you have these giant, traumatized children in grown bodies, terrified of their kids and, attacking them for getting near them, and thus, triggering feelings. And so, and of course, not talking about any of it and not behaving rationally. And so it's a very, very terrifying, thing to wake up to, as it was for for me and my siblings. And, and concept synergies, threats and security guards and stuff just kind of reminds me that we're in a world where, regardless of the rationality, it's not safe to say certain things. Or, people won't usually map out their traumas in advance and say, if you say this, I'll leave you, but if you say it like this, I won't leave you. They like to pretend, to be above all those things, particularly in New Age circles. And then, you step on the wrong word or toe or something, and then suddenly you're dissociated from, and they don't have the decency to explain the process, because now you're the threat, you're on the outside. And so, so those fears reenacted, in various ways, made it an almost traumatic experience to voice the various things that, have built up over the years. And yet you cannot have a loving relationship out of fear. And so these things have had to be said. And, in a culture where, Jach won't talk, or concept synergy won't reply to certain things, and maybe Lazaris won't talk. And I would imagine Lazaris would talk about these things if you got into the weight, but I don't even know if, Lazaris is doing private sessions anymore, and if they are, it's a little bit hard to carry on a relationship, in 2-year wait times. That's no way to carry on a friendship, as any of us could attest for. If I said, I'd love to answer your questions, send them to me in an email or whatever, and 2 years later, after you pay my fee, then I will respond. It's a less than optimal, approach to a friendship. So the pattern that I've noticed is that on the other side of voicing, anger, hurt, criticism, and going counterphobic, like, I'm anxious about this, so I'm going to go into it, and focus on it more. I actually feel closer to Lazaris than I did before. And so this timing of this video, after, making all the other videos, feels authentic to me. And so here's what I love about Lazaris. Well, the first thing that I notice when I look at that is that there is a part of me that loves Lazaris, and there is a part of me that is in antipathy. And the part of me that is in antipathy is the scared, punished child that is doing it wrong and being punished for doing it wrong and expecting to do it wrong, and can, never, ever, do any, of these hundreds of techniques and all that. So that's the part that's kind of most scared. And the part that is most scornful is the adolescent, that looking at all these hypocrisies and unfairnesses. And he's basically doing his best, because an adolescent can't respond and change things for the most part. But an adolescent is trying to get, the parental figure, the leader, the, whatever, to, grow up and stop abusing the child, because the adolescent doesn't like, can feel and understand and relate to the fear and the inability of the child. And the adolescent is angry. Why aren't you doing a better job to take care of this child? I can't do it. But surely there's a competent adult out there, able and willing, to be useful, right? And so, that's there. And It's actually quite a process to, in a traumatically illiterate culture, to grow up. Most of the time, there's a very strong subcurrents of, traumatized child complex PTSD, and tremendous sensitivity and anxiety, around, things going on, and it's and in a culture that America is very keen not to go into this terrain. Whether it's about having a positive attitude or whatever, it's just, America does not like to go into grief, to go into trauma, to go into our inadequacies as a culture. And so these are all handed down to the most vulnerable members of the culture, our children, who, if the grown-ups can't deal with it, they certainly can't. But they're asked to do what the grown-ups cannot do, and punished for doing it wrong. And that's a very, very frightening terrain. And yet, I do get a sense. So the part of me that loves and enjoys playing with Lazaris, is, I would call, the authentic self. And unfortunately, I only meet or glimpse this part of me maybe at best 15% of the time. And so 85% of the time, completely, dissociated, from that. But 15% of the time, it's like, oh, that's me. And there's a gap between me and daily life and me, right? There's a gap. And, maybe that's the gap between the ego and the self, or, the cultured identity and the part that walks by our side that, is kind of who we would be if we were not pummeled and traumatized by the culture into being adaptive to that amount of pain. This is who we would be. And I would say that it is both a trauma and a joy to meet that self. Because when I see, okay, that's me, I love it. It's like, yes, that's me. I like it. I see it. There it is. I love it. I don't know how to hang on to it. I don't know how to embody it. Does that mean not bring up this issue with the client, or bring it up? Does that mean make this video or not make that video? It's like that me is walking out there beside me, but is not fully in this body. That me is also not worried about what's going on in the body. Me here is, in absolute panic, about that. And that panic often obscures my awareness of that me. And so, but that me loves playing, loves loving, loves, beauty, loves magic. That me, I think, is quite at home in Lazaris's world. And, the greatest grief, the greatest sadness is that me is far away. 15% of the time, I'm getting glimpses of that me. And for the most part, no one else is getting those 15% glimpses. That's the other sadness. Even when I'm in that 15%, it's like, yes, 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 then nobody sees that self. they see their projections and their fears and all of that stuff. So it's difficult for me to stay connected to that part of me, and it's difficult for other people to see and connect to that part of me. And so it's very easy to lose the thread, because one of my safety mechanisms is to try and understand what the other person sees when they look at me, because then I'm more able to predict what they're likely to do, and then I feel less shocked as a sensitive, and I feel safer. But what people see, when I tune into what other people are seeing when they look at me, it's almost never myself. And so I'm tuning in to and identifying with their projections in order to make accurate predictions and stuff. It's a very miserable, the downgrading from self down to a projection in order to predict, what's likely to occur is a miserable downgrade. It's a painful downgrade. It's like, you see that? I don't even try and relate to what it is that you're seeing. It's miserable. Yeah, so that's there's a lot of fear and a lot of sadness, for decades, and this is also where my adolescent gets angry. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't have the tools. This doesn't work. And there's also some anger at Lazaris talking about how easy this is, etc. It's like, fine, show me some examples. When Jack, Penny, and Michael can't pull it off, and they're decades with Lazaris as much as they want, then maybe it isn't so easy, right? Let's see some examples of people really easily embodying their self. Now, I do meet them, not Lazaris friends that I know, but I do meet people in varying degrees embodying self. And I also see that, another, I guess, gift and tragedy is I can often see other people's self, and it's beautiful. But it's also a downgrade to then realize how separate they are from their self. I'm looking at their self, but they're very far away from that self. So they're not acting anything like their self, just like I'm far away from myself and I'm not acting, very integrated with that self because I can't see it clearly. So that's so that's the part that loves Lazaris and loves the material, etc. So what is it that this part loves and, is at home by, etc., and sees? And I'll start with the more analytical because my adolescent and stuff can certainly, appreciate, not love, but appreciate certain things. Like Lazaris has a terrific memory. I just listened to a blending, and he quoted an underlying truth word for word, from the 80s without looking at notes, and then came back to a new blending and added extra dimension to it. Lazaris's timing is pretty darn good, with managing to remember this. Lazaris doesn't have time, but he manages to sync moments in a meditation with music. So the music stays constant, which means Lazaris is adjusting the meditation so that, a brand new meditation on his first rehearsal is syncing up with the right moments in the music and good tracks of music. So technique, I would say. Lazaris is very well read and articulate, and has a good, very, definitely the top 1% use in language. Understanding the meanings of words and creatively embellishing those words, giving those words additional meaning. Like, I think every word that Lazaris has described has added dimension and awareness to that word for me, and so that's undeniable. And, the track record, it's, if I look at my own writings and stuff over 30 years, I would say there's probably, there's more consistency in the Lazaris material than there is in my own writing. I can see the pattern of self, in my own writings over 30 years, and I can see the pattern in Lazaris. I think there's a little bit tighter cohesion. So, that's, and I have pretty high integrity, meaning pretty high integration and efforts, thousands of hours spent trying to blend heart, mind, and body, and so that's definitely highly integrated. And then diversity, depth perception comes when you look at life from two different perspectives simultaneously. And the depth perception emerges in the tension between two divergent perspectives, right? So that's how we see 3D with two eyes or two ears, right? So the wider the vantage points are. So if I talk with someone with the opposite point of view of me, and they're intelligent and they explain why they have their point of view, and I explain why I have mine, we will both go away with much more depth perception if we're interested in learning, as opposed to defending a unilateral either-or position. If we're interested in learning, we'll go away with more depth perception if we talk with someone who has the opposite point of view. Because it's like looking at reality from, we see depth from 6 inches apart, but that's very close. Imagine talking about the world when someone's on the opposite side of the planet right now. So it's hot weather here, it's cold weather there. It's day here, it's night there. You look around and you say, I see, papaya trees. They look around and they see irises, and if in an either-or paradigm, one of us is lying. But in a both-and paradigm, you gain depth perception. Massive amounts of, you realize you're in a complex ecology that is night and day simultaneously, that's hot and cold simultaneously, that has millions of species, and wow. So it opens up the complexity of the world. So the farther an authentic perspective is from one's own, the more depth perception comes from seeking to synergize and mingle, to create more dimensionality. Now, on that dimension, or on that metric, Lazaris, again, is top 1%, because they're talking as a non-physical being outside of space and time, about all kinds of things that are not registering in our senses when we're focused on the senses in space and time and have been physical, right? So you've got a very different perspective coming together. And so reality gets bigger by holding my perspective and holding Lazaris' perspective and being curious how they relate. So Lazaris, 10 out of 10 marks for bringing divergence and depth through different perspective. Then we got integrity and, just consistency of statements pretty high. And most teachers, gurus, and things get into sex scandals. Whether it's John of God or the Catholic priests, and I don't think it's limited to Catholics. I think 5% of priests, minimum, have taboo sexual relationships with their parishioners, children or otherwise. So that's refreshing that element of the abuse, doesn't seem to be there, emanating from Lazaris. Perhaps an edge for Lazaris not being physical. Interesting material, imaginative material, good balance of system and feeling, like the left brain and the right brain. So it's not just a lecture, it's not just a meditation, it's a lecture and a meditation. So pretty good balance. Weak balance in embodiment, meaning, I think people get a lot more out of a Tony Robbins events because of all the dancing and shouting and cheering and running around and stuff. And there's a lot to be said for embodiment. We're a mixture of heart, mind, and body. Lazaris neglects the body. So weak there. Lazaris doesn't take cheap shots most of the time. I would say that most of the time, a Lazaris event will be far more thought-provoking in a meaningful way than anything on TV and all that. So it's kind of an objective analysis. My adolescent or observer has no issues, giving all that to Lazaris in terms of a fair earned set of compliments or assessments. But what the part of me, the kind of the self or the magical child, which kind of has strong correlations to self, what I love the most about Lazaris is playful innocence, resonance, hope, optimism, possibility. In some ways, the opposite of what my child hates, because, my child is expecting to get it wrong, and as someone regressed in complex PTSD, I am expecting to get all kinds of things wrong and be punished, and the endless toil of trying to climb up these 7 steps and what's that mean and what does that mean, and just living in trauma and in fear and just waiting to be punished, basically, and feeling not enough. My child is furious, and my adolescent is furious at the idea of how easy everything Lazaris says is. But that's that's the part that I love. Like when Lazaris plays with crystals on the crystal videos, and that sense of innocence and love and wonder. I'm listening to the resonance. What is it? Connecting Lazaris, anyway, the law of resonance or resonance, whatever it is. Anyway, Lazaris has a wonderful, pronunciation of vowels and just bringing in energy. And I love that the meditations are not about deleting things or bringing in the void, but filling with a cacophony of this and colors and feelings and senses. I really appreciate that style of meditation. And the fact that some of the more real moments of my life and some of the it helped me in both being re-traumatized and also taking psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA, and marijuana candies, all in my kind of late 30s for the first time. That helped me be aware that there was a self, that is separate from the person I think I am, and that I love and see the beauty of that self, that self feels more beautiful, true, and good than, my algorithms for processing overwhelming panic and fear in a traumatic body or a traumatized body. So that's really, it's just beautiful to see, some sense of rapport and so in some ways, I'm really looking forward to dying, because I may or may not find myself out of the maze of traumatic memories and fear, in this body, but I would suspect that those glimmers of the authentic self, those 15, 20% glimmers, may move to a full-on realization without the distracting traumatic symptoms of being, in a tremendously fear-based body, probably with an addiction to the chemicals produced by fear, because I do have adrenal fatigue and things like that. So that's the part of me that loves that, that part of Lazaris the most. And what's great about, from my child and adolescence perspective, I haven't done a spiritual bypass and pretended like nothing's going on about this, right? So my child and adolescent feel safer having me talking about all these different concerns and bringing them up, etc. I feel clearer. And in that clarity, it's a little bit easier to catch a glimpse at the authentic self. And so, and that is the self that, loves Lazaris and just the wonder of the world the most.